Okay, so here we're looking at the anterior portion of the heart, and I know that because I know that, a lot of traffic noise. This is the right coronary artery, right here. And if I turn it around, and you can see that it moves from my left to right. And then if you come around the back, you can see the left coronary artery, and that pretty much goes straight up and down. But that is so beautiful. Wow. This up here, going right along the top of the ventricle, is the circumflex artery. And this heart is cut up more than I would have liked, but let's take a look at the inside. First thing I want to point out to you is the myocardium. Look how thick that is. That is amazing how thick that muscle is. It's crazy thick. And that piece that I just showed you, okay, is the thickness of the muscle in the left ventricle. It's huge. So now let's look at the thickness of the muscle in the right ventricle, although that is not cut. So give me a moment. Look how thin this wall is right here. This is the wall of the right ventricle, and this is the wall of the left ventricle. Holy cow, what a difference. The reason for that is because the left ventricle has to pump with much more pressure because this is sending blood to your entire body, whereas the right ventricle, and you can see the thickness of the wall, is only pumping blood to the lungs, which are right next door to where the heart is. So the right ventricle does not need as much, and you wouldn't want as much pressure coming from the right ventricle, because if the blood pressure is too high, then it's going to blow out your lungs if the blood goes rushing in there at super high pressure. All right, so let's take a look at the inside. Now, these strands, let me get a different tool. These strands right here, well, let me turn it so it's right side up. Okay. These strands are called the chordae tendineae. And you can see that they're sort of free. And the muscle down here that they connect to, so the part of the myocardium, that's myo is muscle and cardium is heart, so it's just heart muscle. The muscle that they attach to right here are called papillary muscles. And I'll explain those in a minute. So papillary muscles, chordae tendineae, and up here, what the chordae tendineae connect to are actually the flaps of valves. So right here is the flap of the left atrioventricular valve. And here's the other flap of the left AV valve. The left AV valve is also called the bicuspid or the mitral valve. So bicuspid, two cusps, and here are the two cusps. I'm going to stop this right now because I need to see what this video looks like, because I don't know if I'm getting enough light. Oh, there's enough light right here. Well, anyway, so that's what those are. And so let's take a look at this valve from underneath. So you've got the chordae tendineae connected to the valve, right? So this is the ventricle, and when the ventricle contracts, what you don't want is blood to go, when this contracts, what you don't want is blood to go back up into the atrium, because then it's going in the wrong direction. So the valves have to close. So how does that work? Now the atria have been cut off this heart, which is kind of a bummer. I'll get out the other one and see if it's any better. Okay, so here we're looking at the anterior portion of the heart. This hole right here is not supposed to be here, so you can ignore that. The reason I know this is anterior is because this is the left coronary artery, and so on your heart, this goes from the upper left to the lower right. So even though it, you have to picture the heart in anatomical position, right? So this would be in the person, or in this case, in the cow. So this runs along the line that separates the left ventricle from the right ventricle. Okay, and so if we went in, and which we will do underneath there, you would find more a wall of myocardium that separates the right ventricle from the left. So, all right, so then if we turn it over to look at the posterior side, what we can see, we're going to call this the right coronary artery. However, that's not the exact name, because it actually is really short, and then it is split into all these other arteries that have different names, which you're not responsible for here. So the right coronary artery comes here, and then it goes down, okay, and it splits again, the back of the heart this time, to left and right ventricles. Okay, so that is the biggest landmark for telling the anterior from posterior. So that's posterior, and that is anterior. All right, let's talk about the muscle that makes up the heart. The muscle is called myocardium, myos meaning muscle and cardium meaning heart. So this heart came cut already, so it's not exactly cut the way I would have done it, but nevertheless. So if you look right here, you can see that that is clearly muscle looking, which is what the heart is made of. It's cardiac muscle, which if we have time, we'll go into the histology of that and looking at microscopic, the cells of this as opposed to the cells of skeletal muscles and how they're different, which they are. So that's the myocardium. So I do have another heart that I'll bring out. I don't know if it'll be in a better shape, but that's what it is. So this right here is the left ventricle. Okay, so we looked at this. It separates right from left halves. Here's the left half, so we're opening that. So we're looking in at the right, I'm sorry, we're looking in at the left ventricle. The thing that I want to point out is, notice how thick the muscles of the left ventricle wall are. I mean, they're enormous. The reason for that is because this is the side of the heart that pumps the blood to the rest of your body. Now, if we look at the right ventricle, the space looks bigger, right? You're going, whoa, but that's so much bigger. Yes, I guess, volume-wise, but look at the thickness of the wall here. Look how thin that is in comparison to the other one. The reason for that is because this is the side of the heart that pumps blood just to the lungs, which are immediately lateral to the heart. So the blood doesn't have to go that far. Not only that, but you don't want the blood going into the lungs under a huge amount of pressure, because it's going to go down to the capillary level, and the capillaries couldn't handle that high pressure and they would blow out. So the reason this is thin is because it doesn't have to pump the blood very far, and when it does pump the blood, you don't want it under a whole lot of pressure because it'll blow your lungs out. Okay, so now let's look at the inside of a ventricle. And we'll just look at this side because it's actually really nice. Okay, so first of all, we have these little strings, okay? And these strands are called chordae tendineae, and they're pretty tough. So if you've ever heard a song or somebody say, "Oh, you're pulling on my heartstrings," these are your heartstrings, and they're in both the right and left ventricles. Their job is to prevent blood from going in the wrong direction. Okay, so remember when we were doing when we were looking at action potential, we didn't want that moving in the wrong direction, and just like the valves in the veins, keeping the blood moving in the same direction. So let's look at the wall of the ventricle. Right down here, where these chordae tendineae attach, it attaches to muscle. And this area of the muscle is called their papillary muscle. It's still myocardium, it's just they have a particular name for that. And then if you follow them upwards, they actually attach to this, which is a flap of the left atrioventricular valve. It's sometimes called the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. The reason it's that is because it has two cusps, two flaps. And so here's one of the flaps, right here, and here's the other one. All right. So what happens is, the atria are missing on these, they cut them right off. But so the blood, when it's coming in back from the lungs, it comes into the atrium to left ventricle. And then the ventricle is going to squeeze to get that blood to go out into the body. And that squeeze creates a huge amount of pressure. And so if you didn't have a valve here, that blood would go shooting back up into the atria, which you don't want. So here's how it works. The ventricles contract. There is a significant increase in pressure in the ventricles, which is pushing the blood. And it can go out one of the major arteries, or it can go back up into the atria. Well, the blood pushes up towards the atria, and it sort of forces those flaps together. But if the chordae tendineae weren't there, those flaps would just blow backwards out into the atria, and the blood would be going in the wrong direction. So this is a beautiful form fits the function, because if these weren't there, then it wouldn't prevent the backup. Okay, so chordae tendineae, left AV or mitral valve, papillary muscles, and all in the left ventricle, and that's beautiful. So the right ventricle in this particular heart is not cut very well, so, oh no, yes it is, let's bring that over. So again, smaller, but here's the chordae tendineae. The papillary muscle is actually much more visible on this side. Notice they're way shorter. So papillary muscle, chordae tendineae, and this is part of the right AV valve, and the right AV valve is called the tricuspid valve because it has three cusps. Now, because of the way it's cut, here's one of them, here's the other one, and then the third one, which has been cut, is over here. So there are three flaps on the right side. The mechanism is the same. Chordae tendineae prevent the flaps from being blown back into the atria and allowing the blood to go in that direction. Okay, so this is the left side of the heart, which means, oh, nice. Oh, perfect. Look at this. This, whoop, can you see it? Yeah, that is the aorta. Look how thick those walls are. And hopefully you remember from your blood vessel research that the arteries have really thick walls. And they don't generally collapse. Obviously, this is collapsed because it's no longer living. But anyway, so let's see if I can get the light right to show you what's going on in there. I don't know if you can really see it. But anyway, so the aorta is cut. So let's open it up and take a look, because this is a different kind of valve. So here, that we've just opened, notice there are, I don't know how well you can see this, there are whoops, no, that's the wrong one. It looks like one of them's been cut off. So these two things right here are two of the three cusps that make up the aortic semilunar valve. Semilunar because the shape of these kind of look like crescent moons. All right, so these are two of the the aortic semilunar valve. Now, the way these work is from the left ventricle, when it contracts, the blood is forced out into the aorta right by these flaps. Right. Which is great, and it's under really high pressure at this point. So when the ventricles relax, the pressure goes down, and what's going to happen is the blood is going to try to go backwards into the ventricle, which you do not want to happen. So the blood goes out here, the ventricles relax, some of it tries to back up, and what happens is as the blood is backing up, it catches in these little pockets, like this and this, and when it catches in the pockets fill up, and then they form a seal. So picture a third one over here. They form a seal which prevents blood from going in the wrong direction. Again, beautiful, form fits the function. These flaps, when the blood is coming out, they just push to the side. They don't create any friction or anything. But then once the blood starts to come back this way, it fills up these little pockets. They slam shut, and the blood can't get back into either ventricle, because this is the same setup on the right side, except instead of the aortic semilunar valve, it's called the pulmonary semilunar valve, because that's where the blood going out through that valve is going to the lungs, and pulmonary refers to the lungs. Okay, there's one more thing I have to show you, and it is so beautiful on this. I'm so excited. So here's one of the aortic semilunar valves, right? And right behind it is this kind of massive hole. Now, it's not as massive on humans, of course, but you say, what the heck is that for? That is where the coronary circulation begins. So that's what that hole is. And the reason it's behind one of the cusps of the aortic semilunar valve is because this is where the blood pressure is the highest. So the blood comes out of the left ventricle, pushes, flattens these against the wall. Then the blood tries to back up, which we just talked about. When that blood is backing up, that's when it goes through this and out into the left or right coronary arteries. So this is for one of them, and then there's another hole behind another one of the cusps, which has been cut off here. So that's where the coronary circulation itself begins. So that's awesome. All right, that was so cool. Thank you.